Hello everyone, hola, kalimera. Hopefully that's the correct term. I'm still improving on my Greek. Great to be with you. I'm going to be talking to you about leading global technology teams, but before we get into that, just a little bit about me. I'm Portuguese, I live in London, and I'm a VP of Engineering at Openbet, which obviously has a big team here in Athens, so it's great to be with you. A bit about my background. I've been in software engineering my whole career. Started as a software engineer, individual contributor, and moved on to different leadership roles throughout. I have been in the betting and gaming industry before. For those of you that might be familiar with some of the brands in the UK, I was head of tech at William Hill and then head of tech at Skybet, not intentionally going through competitors, by the way. But in between, I've spent 5 years leading software engineering at the BBC. So streaming services, both for audio and video, as well as hopefully one that you'll know, BBC News as an app and a global news brand. A little bit about Openbet to try and set the context for how we lead our teams. We're very passionate about betting and sports. We're a business-to-business provider of some pretty big brands around the world, including some here in Greece, which we're very proud of. We do that scale at speed, and we support every big sporting event, like the one that happened right here last night. Our vision is to create an ecosystem that reimagines safe betting entertainment for billions of sports fans and to raise the stakes and deliver unrivaled access to the world's most comprehensive betting ecosystem. A few stats, because it wouldn't be a good presentation without some stats to brag about. We have 60 plus licenses globally with different operators, supporting 450 plus brands. At peak time, we support around 100,000 bets per minute. And we're very proud of the last one, which is 100% uptime, i.e. things just work during big events that obviously our customers massively care about. A bit of our global footprint. It's about 1,300 people in our team across all the various disciplines. And it's a truly global footprint, as you can probably see from this map, different offices with different functions across the globe. We have been doing this for 25 years, so we do think we are the best out there doing it. And obviously there's a lot of experience within our teams. Everybody's very passionate about both sports, technology, and betting. And those are some of the key pillars for us, really. We have obviously a very strong technology stack. Our people are the most important assets in our organization, as I'm sure it's the same for many of you. And we have, again, 25 years of experience that helps us develop great products for our customers. So, getting more into leading a global technology team, which is something that I really enjoy doing. I guess the first question is it really that much different from leading a team that is in the same location or in the same country and the same region? Just before I go on, can we get a show of hands for how many of you work across time zones? Yeah, a few people, so hopefully you'll be able to relate to that. The answer to this question is yes and no, and I know that's a bit of a crap answer, but it's true, right? A lot of the principles, the majority of the principles are still the same of good leadership. At the same time, there are many things that will be different. And this has become my favorite question, daily question, which is, what time is it? And I now have the widget on my phone that shows 6 different time zones. Apple doesn't do more than 6. To actually try to remind myself of what time it is in the different offices across our teams to make sure that I'm not calling somebody or spamming someone at 3 in the morning. So this is a big question because it does impact massively on how a global team operates. Another key point is face-to-face time. Now, I know that the majority of companies these days work in an hybrid environment, and a lot of companies even do remote work. We don't. Our teams are office-based. It's still hybrid, so people come into the office a few days a week. Whole different talk to get into the ins and outs of that. But this face-to-face time is incredibly valuable to build relationships, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about the dangers with not having that later on. But I think about the conversations you have before getting into a meeting room, conversations you have arriving in the office, the how was your weekend type conversation. So, quick question for you. What is football? Now, given all the noise, there was next to my hotel until 3 in the morning last night. Congratulations to the winners. I'm going to guess that when you think about football, you think about this, right? For those of you based in Athens, I'm going to guess that you think about this. This is my team, very proudly supporting Portugal, very proudly Portuguese champions. But that's not the same answer in a very trivial question for everybody in our team. So if you think about the people in our teams in North America, they're probably thinking about people with helmets and a ball in their hand, right? Which is a very different conversation. And more recently, I've discovered, and I'm going to actually experience one of these games in Australia, that in Australia, the football is something completely different as well. Apparently, there's an oval pitch with 2 rugby goals, and you can kick the ball and grab the ball. You can basically do everything. So if you ask me in a couple of weeks, I'll hopefully know a bit more about it than I do today, but it looked very confusing. So this is a very tiny example on how a very trivial question that feels very natural for the majority of us can mean very different things across the company. I'm still refusing, by the way, at Openbet to call it soccer, which is how people refuse to. I just can't. Like, sorry, it's been my whole life with football. I just can't change. And that leads us to thinking about, how do we create these high-performing teams, and how do we actually make sure that we have a culture that works globally? And I think that creating trust across cultures and time zones is extremely difficult, right? If you can't even have the same definition of football, obviously there will be other things that will impact people in different ways. But at the same time, it's truly imperative for success. If we can't create culture, if we can't create trust across these different teams, across these different cultures, then we are going to have a lot of trouble operating and being successful. So what do we need to consider? I think there's probably 2 main things to have in mind. One is the macro picture, like what is happening in the world across the different regions, and at the same time, what's our approach? Like in this case, what's the Openbet approach? For you would be, what is your company approach? And every time I think about leading technology teams, I kind of split it in 3 pillars. What are the business concerns and what are the business goals? What are we trying to achieve as a business overall? What's our product and technology strategy? Intentionally put into the same bucket, so it's not separate. And ultimately, our most important asset, our teams, and how do things impact our teams across the globe. So let's talk a little bit about increased macro pressures, right? And some of the things that have been happening in the world. I'm not going to talk about COVID-19. I think that's been talked about a bit too much already. But one of the things that obviously has been quite prominent post-pandemic and over the last few years has been inflation. Now, the interesting thing about inflation obviously has had significant impact in the Western world, in most countries, is that it is also different and it impacts differently across different regions, right? So the impact of inflation in Bangalore is very different from the impact of inflation in Montreal. Another interesting factor for those of us working in the technology industry is that more recent we've seen tech layoffs. Now, unless you were already working in the industry in the dot-com boom, then it's probably not something that we've seen a lot of. I think a lot of people working in this industry always felt like this is a safe haven, right? Nice job, we're good. Every individual gets to pick where they work. And I think the recent economic dynamics and everything that some of the big companies have done have changed a little bit the thinking behind this. And obviously, there's quite a few other things going on in the world. This is actually a picture that I've used for a presentation, an executive presentation when I was in my role at the BBC, because we were trying to present stats updates to our executive committee on how many people had gone to BBC News at the time when Russia invaded Ukraine. Now, it was a very different context at the time. My main concern, at the time, my team was all based in the UK, so everybody was safe. And obviously we had journalists, so people in the wider team at the BBC that were based both in Ukraine and Russia, so there was some concerns around that. And Russia also blocked the BBC.com domain to avoid BBC News operating in Russia. There's probably a whole talk about that once, in a few years on how those dynamics panned out. But it was both concerning about our colleagues that were there, but also, very much about the tech and how do we continue to serve news, which is one of the main duties of the BBC as a public service organization. And at the time, I thought, okay, global things impacting my job. This is quite big, right? Well, now, in my role, and at Openbet, we have an office and a team based in Lviv in Ukraine. So when you think about those dynamics and how this bit of news and this old screenshot really impacts my job day to day, is very different. And I should give a shout out to our tech colleagues in Lviv for going to work every day and continuing to help the wider team through very difficult circumstances. But when I joined the organization, one of the key things that I was very keen to do was to meet the teams. right? So as many as I've been coming to Athens quite a bit, London obviously, been to Canada, and I'm going to hopefully get around to see most of our teams over the first 9 months, 12 months in the organization across the globe. Obviously, I can't go to Lviv for obvious reasons, so we did a town hall, like a virtual town hall. Our CEO does those conversations with the teams every now and then, so I just tagged along, really. Say hi to the team, meet everybody. So as we're having that conversation, all very nice, just trying to understand, who people are, what do they want to know, what are their key concerns from a tech perspective, we spotted that everybody was getting really distracted, right? So just imagine that now you all start looking sideways and we're in a tiny box on Teams trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And what happened next, I don't think we're very, I'd like to tell you that there's a recipe and we're always prepared for these things, but we're not. We waited for a minute or so, and one of our colleagues came in front of the camera and said hello in full army uniform. Right, so look, I didn't have much to say other than just checking if he was doing okay, and he'd just come back from the front line because he'd been he's in the army with everything that's going on. This is just to, I guess, explain the different dynamics that, for example, if you think about it from my perspective, I'm sitting in an office in London. I can't quite relate. I try to, but I can't quite relate to what is going on there, really. And I think these global dynamics really have an impact on how we then operate. Another important point, if you think less about the problems of the world and more localized problems, is increased business complexity, right? Openbet is part of Endeavor, which is a massive group that has many companies, and obviously that brings a lot of pros and, some complications, and I'm sure those of you that are part of bigger companies and bigger groups will probably relate to. And more recently, we've also merged with IMG Arena, which is another company, another tech company from the same group. I've been heavily involved with that, and for those of you that have been involved in any merger and acquisition activity, obviously things always get a bit messy before they get better. We're actually at the end of this, so I think we have a stronger team and stronger proposition at the end of it. But still, there's more complexity than just what's happening around the world. And also, our customers go through the same thing, right? If our operation is global, one of the key reasons why our operation is global is because our customer base is global. So when we think about how these things impact us, we also need to think about how these things impact our customers. And another interesting point when you think about global customer base is that when I was at Sky Bet, realistically, you worried about football from a betting perspective, right? There's the Premier League, Champions League, and then you have European, like international tournaments like the Euros that is about to start in a few weeks. But other than that, you're probably okay. I think the difference for us having global customers is that we have to worry about all sports that happen globally, so there isn't really much of a quiet time. Now, there's pros to that, obviously, but it's also very intense. So let's focus on what we can control, right? And I think a key thing for me is that caring about our teams is global language. Right? It doesn't matter where someone is based in the world, what they do, what time of the day it is there. If you care about your teams, they will know it and they will feel it. Right? Now, they might feel it differently, and you may have to take different approaches with different cultures, but teams will know, and that will definitely be something that they'll feel as well. So a bit more detail on how the previous map works from a technology perspective. We have over 800 people in tech, engineering, product, and so, all the way from Melbourne to Vancouver, stopping 6 times along the way. This does make for a very interesting day, by the way. Start my day talking to our friends in Australia, and usually end my day talking to our friends in Canada. It's a very interesting dynamic because you kind of follow the sun as you go along, and you try to interact with different people within, obviously their working day, and try not to forget how that might impact them if they have to be on a late call or on an early call. And what I like about this is that it's an intentionally global culture. You could look at it and think, oh, why do you need so many offices? Maybe you don't need to have, 1 location or 2 locations. At a time where I think that the world has finally realized that diversity, equity, and inclusion is such a big part of, being successful, I think that having these hubs across the globe really brings that diverse thinking almost by default. Obviously, we have to enable it, and very mindful that we need to do so, but it does bring that diverse thinking to the table almost by default, just from the different views that you have. And organizations evolve, right? We've been talking about a lot of challenges, and I think it's important to note that as organizations evolve, leadership needs to evolve too. What we're doing today can't be the same that we were doing 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. And there was a panel earlier around product and engineering alignment, and I apologize for putting my own picture in my own presentation. I know that looks bad, but I just wanted to call out this because I think it's a key cornerstone of how you make a team successful, right? Not the picture, the fact that we're outside one of our customers' casinos, but Sam DePorter, which is our VP of product, and he's here today, you'll hear about him, from him in one of the panels later, and myself have had a very strong alignment and conscious alignment since we started working together. I actively challenge our teams on, like, if you ever get a different message from either of us, please do call it out because we're doing something wrong. And I think that alignment, don't get me wrong, we don't agree all the time, quite the opposite, but we choose to decide to sort our stuff out and then actually try to make sure that we have an aligned view for how the teams operate. And I think that probably everybody here has experienced someone in a leadership position saying something and their peers saying something else and the chaos that causes. So we're very conscious about this as an enabler for the organization. At the same time, as much as we're aligned, we can't interact with over 1,000 people on a daily basis. Our teams do the work, our leaders set the tone. So we can travel, we can invest money in developing our people, and obviously I think the most important part is investing our time. There's nothing more precious than giving our teams and our people our time. But ultimately, our teams do the work and our leaders set the tone. So one of the things that we do have across all of those different hubs that you've seen is local leaders, right? So people that are the general manager for that location, almost regardless of their day-to-day job, they're the local manager for that location. And the big part of what they have to do is be connected to the wider organization to make sure that there's those connections across different locations and different offices and that every location is represented in the decisions that we make. Another thing that I'm very passionate about is having a very strong and aligned leadership team. Like, I don't have a lot of non-negotiables, really. I think it's probably my only one. I've joined, there's some people from the team here, so you can ask them and get their view. But my one non-negotiable, and I've said this to the team a couple of months after joining, is that the team comes first, right? And the team comes first because I do believe that emotionally connected teams have more empathy for each other. Fancy words, I know. But if you're a director that has, I don't know, a team of 100, 200 people, it's very easy to get drawn into your own world and into your own island and just drive your own thing. But the actual business value is on that emotional connection and actually understanding the wider problem that we have across the wider team. So it's my one non-negotiable with the team is that the team comes first. If something is easier to do because you can just do it for yourself, but you're not helping someone else, it's probably the wrong way to go. And apologies, I'm not actually sure we're allowed, but I think so, on book recommendations. I don't know how many people have read this book, The Advantage of Patrick Lencioni? No? Anybody? Right, he talks about organizational health and talks about dysfunctions of a team. The general thinking is that organizational health trumps everything else in business. It doesn't matter how much money you have, how good your strategy is, if your organizational is not healthy, your leadership's not aligned, everything else is just not going to be as good as it could be. Now, I'm going to give you a challenge if you're going to read this book, which is to go through the first 3 chapters without doing what I did, which is you read the thing and you think, yep, that's true, yep, that's true, yep, that's true, because it just points out on lack of alignment across different leaders, how you feel part of a team or you don't feel part of a team, how do you actually interact yourself and your colleagues. I think this is a massive read for everybody in a leadership role, regardless of which function they're in. And the very similar point applies to Conway's Law. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Conway's Law, but it's the general idea that your organization design and your product or your offering mirrors each other to a certain extent. I think it's quite important to be intentional about the organizational structure that you want to have. Like, I've done a few reorgs in my career, and I don't think there's any perfect organizational structure, to be honest. I think it's much more about what are you optimizing for, right? What things are you trying to do and optimize for to drive a certain outcome at a certain period of time? So what you think the organizational structure is today as your best setup might be very different in a year or 2 years' time. In case you didn't notice or didn't know, everyone in this room has biases, right? All of us have biases. We talk about cultures, we talked about different locations. Everybody has biases. One that I've become very mindful of, with cultural biases and all sorts. One of the ones I've become very conscious of over the last few months is proximity bias. Right? Proximity bias on how differently do we think about the people. I'm based in London, right? I spend most of my time with the London team, and arguably Athens team after that is where I spend most of my time, which means that I spend a lot of less time with our team in Canada, right? Or our team in Australia. So that proximity bias and making sure that we have systems in place to check those biases, I think is a very important thing if you're leading a global team. We come on to strategic investment decisions, right? First of all, these are always difficult choices. All your teams will be asking, okay, can we get this? Should we do it here? Should we do it there? And I think my main advice here is agree how decisions will be made before you have to make them, right? We have a classic on this, which is if we have a new investment and we want to hire a new team, there's always a debate about which location that team should be hired in. Right? And obviously every location wants to grow and be a big part of the business, so you always go into this debate of like, should we hire this team here, should we hire that team there? So more recently we've standardized a bit more, which parts of our business are in which locations. I don't think it's a perfect framework, but it's definitely a lot better than no framework, so we're somewhat on the journey there. And on to my favorite part, really. Communication is the cornerstone of global leadership. Like, make no mistake, we can do a lot of good stuff. If it doesn't land, if people don't get it, it's just probably not going to work. And the funny thing about the map that I've just showed you is that, in my previous job, I used to think, okay, after 3 p.m. on a Friday, you shouldn't message the whole team, right? Or you shouldn't be emailing people on the weekend. I still get that feedback, not perfect. But you shouldn't message people after a certain time. The reality is that today, it doesn't really matter what time I do it. Yes, of course, I can avoid Saturdays and Sundays, but it doesn't really matter what time I do it. There's always someone awake and there's always someone asleep. So when we're writing these messages and doing these things, it's always being very mindful that, yes, people will get this message. They might be having breakfast, they might be having dinner, they may get it halfway through a meeting. So when I joined, my boss said, it'd be really good if you joined our all hands and said hi to everybody in the team. I was like, great opportunity, right? Sounds great. If you got one tiny detail, which was there wasn't one all hands, there was 3. One at 6 a.m. with our teams in APAC, one at 1 p.m. with our teams in Europe, and another one which actually ended up being at 7 p.m. So by then my energy, it wasn't a great intro, my energy wasn't quite there with me anymore, with our teams in North America. And this was my first experience on like, okay, how do we make these things personable, these messages personable, whilst trying to do it across the board? And I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the Slack teams shenanigans that most companies seem to have these days. Tech teams are on Slack, the rest of the business is on Teams, and it's all a bit of a mess. We have that problem, I'm not going to lie to you. But what we try to do, and this is something that we've started doing recently, is every week we share an update with our team. And that update varies with a deliverable that we've done, something that has happened in the team, or any more important business update. And we do that, we don't share it on Teams, we share it on Slack. There's a Tech All Slack channel, and we send it by email as well. More recently, we've also been playing with the format. So instead of just sending big emails, which, let's face it, we're all probably tired of anyway, and most people don't read until the end, we try to play with the format. Is either an audio message or a video message to try and make sure that the team is up to date and knows what's going on, and try and increase that engagement, which hopefully gets the team to get closer together. And one last point on this is there is no such thing as over-communicating with your team. People will be like, we've said this message 2 or 3 times. By the time we say something to our team, we probably debated it 10 times, so we are sick and tired of talking about it. They're probably hearing it for the first time, and let's face it, half of the people won't be paying attention because they're doing something else. So repeating that and over-communicating is definitely something that I think it's worth doing. And the other important part of this is that what we say and what people hear is just not the same thing. Right? If you look at these, I'm not going to go through this, but if you look at some of the differences on communication and how people build relationships and interact across the different regions, these are true. Obviously, some of them are stereotypes, I get that, But these are true. People do genuinely interact differently and communicate differently across the board. I remember when the first time I came to Athens, people in London was like, look, the culture obviously in Greece is different to the culture in the UK. I was like, yeah, I know, I'm Portuguese. I'll be fine, right? It's like it's going to be an easy communication. There'll be no barrier there. But it's true that there are differences in communication and culture across our teams that we need to be very mindful of. Now, it wouldn't be a tech presentation without talking about our tech. So very briefly, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. There's 3 pillars that we have for our product proposition. Our sportsbook, been doing it for 20 years, bread and butter, best in the world at it. Our player account management, so how we handle our player data and integrate a few games and things like that. And our trading system, which is how we aggregate different feeds. And then if you're not familiar with betting, think about it a little bit like the stock market. It's somewhat similar. Now, one of the arguments and the conversations that we have all the time is that these are very different, right? Trading system is a SaaS proposition, multi-tenant, sportsbook is completely different. You're doing one deployment per customer, sometimes with restrictions globally on how regulatory restrictions on what you can do and whether you can do it in the cloud or not, and all of those things. And yes, they are different, but coherence is a massively underestimated part of of any tech strategy. You can have different systems, but you can still have coherence across how you approach it and how you then get the team to work together to a greater outcome. And a big part of implementing that are technology best practices. Now, these are important everywhere. This is an example of our architectural decision records wiki. Don't worry too much about the diagram. It's not an actual Openbet diagram. I don't think we would be allowed to do that. So it's just a random picture from Google. But to make the point that, yes, technology best practices are important for any company. They're a lot more important if you can't actually reach out to someone to ask why they've made a decision or why they're doing something in a certain way. Or if you have to wait 24 hours for them to read your question and then get back to you. So I think they're important across the board, but this just really re-emphasizes how important those best practices are and why they exist in the first place. To the point on the different pillars, I think people can get their head around driving improvement and continuous improvement. With a bit of, instigating and continuous message from leadership, I think that is a message that lands fairly easily with tech teams. The alignment's really hard, though. Right? The alignment's really hard, globally dispersed team, different tech stacks. That alignment is really tricky. At the same time, the alignment's where the prize is. Because if you're doing something that's good and you can share it with everybody in the organization, the outcome is going to be much better for everybody and not just for that team or that area. And innovation is a thing that we've been talking a lot about recently. We have launched or are in the process of launching what we call innovation hubs. Again, something that was started in Melbourne in Australia and we're trying to roll out globally through various initiatives. This is us trying to get teams to propose what projects and what things they want to work on that is different from what we do today or in different tech. That this conference we've seen quite a bit on Gen AI. That is obviously one of the topics and one of the things that has come up quite a bit. At the same time, new products. We've recently partnered with AWS to launch a geolocation product for the betting industry, and that's a partnership that we've been exploring quite a bit to try and drive the organization forward. But more than that, it's a day-to-day effort, right? If as leaders we're not seen to back these initiatives, whether it's the new products or whether it's things that might not look as crucial from a day-to-day perspective like our innovation hubs, then this is never really going to take off. So it's something that we need to be very mindful of. And culture, right? People talk about culture quite a lot, and people celebrate things differently. A lot of people celebrate business outcomes, which, as someone was saying earlier, obviously is why companies exist and a key part of why we go to work. But I think it's also important to celebrate the culture and the values that we want to see. So at Openbet, we have quarterly All-Star Awards. They're based on 3 key areas, and what we've done in the last one of these is instead of just your classic, again, going back to the email and saying, here are the winners, let's celebrate that, we've decided to take a different approach. We've done a video with each of the winners, with each of the 3 winners, so winner per category, to congratulate them. Video call and tried to do some in person, didn't quite work out, but we did a video with each of the winners. And then, as you can see, the video is 13 minutes. It didn't take that long. What we've done was also call out every single person that had been nominated across the entire organization, right? So the managers had to, get the list and then call out each person. And the reason why we've done that is because these are not leadership nominees, right? These are people that have been nominated by their peers. So if we want to instill this recognition culture, it's important that we make sure that people are not only doing it, but be seen to actually be appreciated for doing so. I'm bang on time, which I didn't think I would be, so I'm going to leave you with this, right? Our job as leaders is to inspire those around us, whether they're sitting right next to us here, or whether they're sitting thousands of kilometers away. And the reminder here is that we're all leaders when it comes to that, and when it comes to actually inspiring our teams. Thank you.
We do have time for questions, so...
Only easy ones.
Yeah. Any questions from our audience? Yes.
Thanks. You talked about work following the sun, but as a leader of kind of global teams, how do you make that, are you a follow the sun leader? Or how do you keep that sustainable and maintain energy for yourself?
Yeah, look, I think yes, and it's a little bit of I try not to be. I am in the sense that my day starts with people that I know I only have a short window to connect with. Like, first conversation I had today was with someone in Bangalore because I know that a few hours later they'd be offline. I don't think it's sustainable to be obviously online from 6 a.m. until midnight. I sometimes do it, I'm not going to lie, but it's more on me than anybody else. I think the important thing is to make sure that we have both strong leaders across those different locations, so you have less touch points and it makes it more manageable, and also that you have defined ways of interacting, right? So are there set points on which, like, someone will message you about something because they know it's important and they want you to respond early or whatever, or not. So I think trying to define those, and it's an ongoing process. I think we're constantly learning about it. Is something that we do really well, or we're trying to do well. Like just this morning, an example of talking to, I was already here and got a message from our head of engineering in Melbourne. They were like, "Well, should we catch up?" I'm like, "I'm in a bit of a different day today. Do we really need to? No, okay, quick check-in, we move on, we'll do it properly when I'm there next week." So I think trying to understand that and having those relationships really helps. But yes, it's challenging, for sure.
There's one more over there.
Hello, thank you. So just for the sake of the fun, we should do this in Portuguese? No?
Yeah.
So in my case, we have a distributed team. We have offices in Bangalore, Austin, and so on, but we have a big base in Lisbon. We sometimes feel that we are, for the people that are in Lisbon and they still go to the office, that we are downgrading their experiences because we need to be remote friendly. Do you also feel a little bit the same on the biggest hubs that you have, and kind of any clue on how to manage this?
Yeah, look, I don't think there is a perfect way of managing it. I think because we have so many bases, it's easier, because by default, you just have a Teams link or whatever. You just like, it's just part of the culture. People are expected to do so. It is still a bit weird if you have, say, 4 people in London and we have to connect with just one person in a different office. You still get that same feeling on like, oh, do we really need to do this? I think the key thing is making sure that you do it, and that, you're not, I think one of the things that we're not doing quite as well as we perhaps should is that, all our offices actually, the kit tends to work, so we use that, but people then don't necessarily turn on their screen, so you kind of see people. If you're the one that is more remote, you kind of see people at the end of the room and not actually see their faces and their reactions. So I think there's small things like that that really help, but yeah, it's challenging. I think the other thing is, for us, it's a bit easier because most people are office-based, whatever the office is, so it does make it a bit more of a, level playing field, if you like.
All right, I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you very much.